We are recording. So, where are we in time and space? We are in the month of March. We're like 1 month into our training. So we're 1 month into our 6-month training so far. We have covered, I'm just pulling up what we've covered so far. We have covered what is force therapy, scope of practice. We talked about the way of the guide. We have guided a couple of walks so far. Last week we went over the standard sequence. And next week we're going to talk about language of invitation. And so far your assignments have included creating a sit spot base map, writing about the history of the land where you're on, where you're guiding, learning about the land, learning about the various inhabitants and just other stories about the land. You've written a draft, keyword draft of an introduction to a forest therapy walk. And perhaps you've written a draft of your invitations for pleasures of presence, the part of the walk where we guide people through their senses. And then the next part of the standard sequence is what's in motion. It's a very simple, short little wandering invitation. And then as we move into language of invitation next week, you are going to start writing your own invitations for the part of the standard sequence that's the middle, that we're calling liminality, or the it depends, sort of seeing what happens in between the beginning and the end before you transition into the threshold of incorporation or tea ceremony. And so that's sort of where we are. And I would love to open it up for a check-in round. And the prompt is, yeah, like what questions are you bringing? If you're bringing questions, how is the content landing? And anything you want to share about the course to this point. And does anybody want to start us off? And then we're just gonna, actually, I really like when we make the circle. That seems to flow really well. So let's do that. And even though we're small, we're still big. So I'm just going to read our names off, and then we'll pass to these people, and then we'll decide who's going to go first. So let's see. All right, I will be passing it to Angel. Angel will pass it to Christy. Christy will pass it to Elizabeth. Elizabeth will pass it to Gretchen. Gretchen will pass it to Heidi. Heidi will pass it to Jane. Jane will pass it to Julia. Julia will pass it to Kat. Kat will pass it to Kathleen. Kathleen will pass it to Lynn. Lynn will pass it to Pat. Pat will pass it to Rashay. Rashay will pass it to Sue. And Sue will pass it back to me. And that's just who we're passing it to. But does anybody want to go first? And actually, we're going to squeeze Nina into there. Lynn, if you could pass it to Nina, and then Nina will pass it to Pat.
And I could go first. This is Lynn.
Wonderful. Thanks, Lynn.
And I'm sorry I'm not on visual tonight. I don't know. I don't think anyone in this group is of a, so well, maybe there's some people of a certain age, but I am prepping for a colonoscopy, so you don't need to see me right now. Anyway, I'm here. I am very grateful for the feedback on my pleasures of presence and kind of helping me to open the questions up. The question that has been with me as I'm considering spaces to do my facilitation of groups, my invitations, is how totally silent do they need to be? I mean, obviously it's ideal to have it be completely silent, but if it means that it's going to limit the number of people that attend to get out to where it's quiet enough. I live in a suburb where it's totally silent, or totally not the other than human world is completely natural sound. It could run into interference with the number of people that are willing to travel that far. So that's kind of my question.
Thanks, Lynn. And just so everyone knows, I'm gonna I'm gonna just track the questions and then we'll come back around to them after we hear from everyone.
Then I'll pass to Nina.
Thank you. Hi, Nina. I don't know if you're ready because you just jumped on, but if you are, the prompt is, how's the course content landing so far, and what questions are you arriving with, if you are arriving with any?
Hi, this is Nina. I've had a rough week. I'm in the hospital actually. My husband had a bypass, so the course is good. Kind of questions. I think Angel had mentioned about the cicadas. I have everybody fearful of cicadas. A lot of the volunteers frightened of that, and also a lot of people anxious about the 3 hours. They just get scared when I say 3 hours. So yeah, that would be my question. How to get people to come along. I'm going to pass to Pat.
So don't have any questions, Tam, but I do appreciate the feedback from the assignments. But over the week, I've been thinking about transition. So we talk about transition in terms of the sequence itself for a participant transitioning to these new experiences, these sensorial experiences. But I was also thinking about it in terms of my transition with this, thinking about, we've kind of used a different vocabulary with the forest therapy. And each one of those sort of new things, like opening the door or whatever, has really, I think, helped to make this a more meaningful thing to me. So it's not like anything else, but trying to open the door for my experience as well. So again, no questions. I'm going to pass it to Riche.
Hey everyone. So how's the course content landing? This week was amazing because I actually had time to actually go back and review a lot of the forest therapy like handbook PDFs and things like that for each section, for each module, and reading it a second time and just kind of letting that soak in and really taking it all in a slower pace. I don't know, I loved it. It really helped me really see the whole context of what we're doing and the depth of what we're going to be doing. I love the whole idea about liminality and just really kind of reviewing the way of the guide and settling into that and just feeling so much freedom and openness with that and how we're going to approach that and just letting people really just be their most authentic self when they're out in the forest and letting the forest do its connection with people and the magic happens however it happens. So loving the course content so far. I don't really have any questions right now, but I'm just really grateful. So. I am passing to Sue.
Yeah, hi everybody. Sorry, I'm not feeling real well, so I'm just gonna be kind of quiet today. Anyway, I especially like the concept of the liminality. I thought that was really interesting last week. And I appreciate the couple of questions about where to do your walk, because I live in West LA, which is very urban. So I'm not sure about where to do that. And I'm passing to Tam, or am I passing to Angel? Not sure.
Yeah, you can pass it to me, and I'm actually gonna pass it to Holly. Where's Holly? There you are. I'm gonna pass it to Holly, and then Holly, if you could pass it back to me.
Yeah, I think the material is landing well with me. And so far, I do not have any questions. Tam, I pass it back to you.
And I'm gonna pass it to Angel.
Hi, things are going pretty well. I did get a chance to attend a walk in person at an arboretum near me, and that was really helpful. Just to be there in person, to see like how the transitions take place, just in real time, seeing it all kind of coincide with the different people and then the trainer. And it was a great walk. I enjoyed it so much. I do have a couple questions. I'm wondering about accommodations. For example, if somebody comes and, you know, they are hearing impaired or vision impaired, and they didn't necessarily specify that in an email ahead of time, just kind of how to pivot on that, I guess. I know you utilize your best judgment, but I didn't know if you had any tips or tricks up your sleeve. I don't know. Another question was about how long per invitation? Is it about 15 minutes to 20 minutes, or do you just kind of, you know, gauge it with the flow and how engaged people look? I know Pleasures of Presence is about 15 minutes. What's in Motion, I think, is around like 10 to 15. Just trying to gauge. I mean, I know from the walk I went on in person what that was like, but I didn't know like if there was a standard amount of time, you know, per invitation. That's it. Sorry, I'm passing to Christy.
So I think that the material for me has been good. I've actually enjoyed when I'm at work so I work in a prison, and most of the time I'm at home working, but then 2 days a week I'm on site, and I can actually, while I'm working, sort of listen to the videos on our training modules while I'm working, and I've found that really nice to sort of just have that playing in the background and sort of integrate while I'm working, and sometimes I'll hear something and stop and watch for a minute or listen more, and so I've sort of been playing things over this past couple weeks, so I found that that's been helpful to sort of get the concepts. I did have a question. I'm actually at the end of June and for 2 weeks into July, I'm going on a wellness retreat in France. And the person who's hosting it actually asked if I would be interested in doing a forest therapy walk as part of the retreat for the other participants. And I was like, of course, yeah, that would be great. But also at the same time, I'm like, what is guiding in a place you've never been before? You know, is that a cool adventurous thing on the fly, or is that really risky sort of behavior? You know, and I've been trying to think outside the box on it. Like, you know, I can you know, look at the area on Google Earth, and they were going to get the person who sort of owns the spot where the retreat's happening. They're very familiar with the area, so she was going to ask him if there was a few places that he might suggest that might work, that I could look at maybe on Google Earth or something ahead of time. But so that was sort of my question, is, you know, how high stakes is guiding someplace you've never been? Oh, and I'm passing to Elizabeth.
everyone. Yeah, the content is landing really well with me. I don't think I have any questions right now. I'm just kind of in absorption mode, and it's good. So thank you. I'm passing to Gretchen.
Thanks. I am kind of amazed to have it said out loud that we've been doing this just for a month, because I feel like I've learned a ton. It feels like it's been longer than that in a good way. And just like noticing a lot more, even in places that I've been many times. So the material is landing well. I'd say my questions are, one of the things that I'm kind of nervous about is just, I think I need to kind of practice saying out is more, just to kind of get that more integrated, but some thinking around like, how will I not memorize verbatim, but kind of have prompts. And Tam, I was in your last pod call, and I think you mentioned that you have like a walk sheet that you do just like really bare bones for a plan. But if there are any other like ideas or strategies, especially for new guides, I can imagine maybe having like a little notebook with a couple bullet points for each thing that I want to hit, but just naming that as sort of something I've been wondering about. And then the other two quick questions I have around sort of procedure as we prepare to lead some of our own walks for friends, family, or strangers. I think at the very end of last week's call, it was said that we could start, or we would be able to start based on where we'd be in modules after April 16th. But I was wondering sort of like, what's the other end date that we need to make sure that we have these walks done by in theory? And also wondering if we're going to talk about things like waivers and if we need to have participants fill those out before those walks. So just some procedure questions there. And I am passing to Heidi.
Thanks, Gretchen. I don't really have specific questions coming around. I've been really enjoying the material and the curriculum that has been unloaded, and probably just a little bit more. I had asked about note cards last time, which you gave feedback on, Tam. Thank you very much. And then just more to what Gretchen is speaking to. I am going to pass to Jane.
Hi, hello. I had a couple of questions. I felt I got sort of bogged down in some of the writing. I was able to do a POP with someone, which turned out wonderfully. And then I was thinking about writing it. I'm going, I don't know, it just seemed hard to write down what seems easier to do. But it wasn't that one so much as ones I was writing before about the introduction and the history of your place, which I know way too much about it because that's what I've been doing. And I was trying hard to figure out, well, what is important, because my normal way of functioning in a program would be to see where everybody was at and give a certain amount. And so I was a little, I guess my question in the introductions is, the trick is to not say too much and certainly not give away what you're actually trying to achieve. I understand that. So I was a little not sure of how much you could say about invitations without giving an example, or we may have talked about this before, other people wondering what happens if people start asking you more questions. So that was the one thing that came up. The other thing, my question was about the use of the word healing all the time. I know it can sometimes just mean healing disease or dis-ease. It doesn't have to mean sickness, extreme sickness. But sometimes it seems like we start from this assumption that everyone is sick. And I don't know why, but just reading some of the material, I was having a difficult time dealing with that. I wish you would speak about the ideas of healing. Thanks. And I pass to Julia.
Hi, everybody. It has been a bonkers week work-wise. And I just really resonate with a lot of your concerns. Certainly like healing, I feel the same way. It's sort of like with recovery groups, it's like everyone's broken and needs to be fixed. So that's an edge that I'm aware of as well. And also interested in guiding where you've never been. I do have some opportunities coming up with some groups, and I feel like it might be an opportunity to do some of these guiding, but I have no idea where I'm going. And I just am really amazed and comforted with this work. And I'm finding has these like threads and connections with other things that I'm doing. I have a little Buddhist group and then a little group that with 3 principles, but even in my everyday, I'm really like surprised pleasantly how much this work is affecting my life, like outside of guiding. So it's life-changing. And I really enjoyed the video with Amos on the lineage. So it was really helpful to find a lot of the strands that were inspiring and creative in my background. And in that, they did say about safe spaces, that young people want trigger warnings and they want safe spaces. And that's antithetical to the way of the guide. And that really, like, I just sighed relief, because I just feel like there's like vocabulary police. And I feel like that's a response to what's a very common thing I'm encountering, like in my workplace. So just touch a little bit. I know I've heard this say that we can't guarantee a safe space, but safety is important, and fear and freedom. So we could mention that. And then I just would love to talk a little bit more about imaginal as a word and its meaning. And I'm passing to Kat.
This is Kathleen. I think I saw in the chat that
Yeah.
Kat had to step off. So yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So
Yeah.
Kathleen. So I'm in with the content. I'm enjoying the time to just digest and reflect. There was one of the videos we watched. The reflection of it was like, be in the space to do nothing is really powerful. And so that just hit home with me. And so it goes back to, I feel like, Tam, thank you for saying, like, we're only 1 month into this, because I think last time we had a small breakout, the word I was using was anxious. Like, I don't have my head on top of this. Like, the thought of being ready to do this, like I'm a letter from A to Z. I'm still on letter A and I got to be on Z. So glad I have 5 more months. I just have to take it at my own pace, and doing nothing is really powerful. I just need to embrace and digest this in the right manner for me. So that's a piece of it. And that ties into a question I have is like, is there some suggestions that you have how to get over the hesitation? I am not even comfortable asking someone to do a presence of pleasure, I can't even say it right, pop with me. And so never mind guiding someone. So how do I get over that anxiety that I know that practice will get me there, but I have that anxiousness? And then the second is something I think, Angel, that you recommended or asked a question about, is how do we create an inclusive, welcoming space for all different abilities? So those are my 2 questions. Thank you. And I'm passing it on to Lynn.
And Lynn started it off, so I'm going to pick it back up. Thank you all. There's some really good stuff in here. Just gonna put my screen back on the Brady Bunch style so I can see everybody. Let's see. I'm just gonna kind of go through what I heard and maybe ask for clarifications on a few things to make sure that we're touching upon that. I heard from a couple folks. I heard from Lynn, and also I heard this seconded by I think Sue, about like where to guide and sounds. And I just want to say, I want to preface this with like, you can guide forest therapy anywhere. It's one of the things I love about it. It's not designed, it's not intended to be a deep wilderness experience. The idea is to not remove what we call not nature. the idea really is not to tune out, but to like tune into the soundscapes that we're existing in. So for hearing people, I live in the city. I guide in city parks where there are sirens and helicopters and airplanes and people screaming and dogs barking and all kinds of chaos running around. And it's really amazing what can happen when we slow down. And I've noticed for myself, just even at my sit spot, and especially when I'm guiding through POP, when I really listen and just really explore that sensation of hearing, I find that all the cityscape sounds start to go down and the bird song gets louder. I don't know. But that happens for me, and a lot of people have shared with me that they've had that experience too. So I just want to highlight that as what's possible guiding anywhere. So there's really no wrong place to guide in terms of, you know, and then I want to say, I've had experiences on immersions where we're maybe a little bit more removed, we're in an immersive environment and something's going on. All of a sudden there's 6 gas-powered leaf blowers that show up. This happened to me and Nadine on an immersion. And it was pretty much out of our, like, we couldn't stop it. And it was our first day. Everyone just like is introducing themselves and we can't hear anything. It was a great learning moment. It's like, what do you do in that moment? And then when we unpacked it later and processed, like nobody was as stressed as we were, as the guides were. You know, people could laugh about it. People had like amazing experiences despite that. Like immersive experiences. People told stories about what they were noticing through their senses, not just gas-powered lawnmowers. So I just want to say that we're not looking for quiet spaces to guide. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for, and there is going to be a trail assessment that comes up when you get to the guided walk module portion. And it's got a bunch of questions, and there's, you know, you're not going to hit every single feature that would make an ideal trail for forest therapy. But what you're going to do is get a sense of like what feels good to you. And one example of that is like bathrooms. For some of us, guiding on a trail where there's no bathrooms is going to be a hard no, because that doesn't feel safe, or that doesn't feel supportive, or it's too uncomfortable for us as the guide. And some of us are going to find trails that are so awesome, but they don't have a bathroom, but we're going to do it anyway. And we're just going to hold it the best we can. And maybe that means communicating beforehand, just so you know there's no bathrooms here. So plan ahead, whatever that means. And maybe you let people know like where good spots are to pee outside. And, you know, not everybody is comfortable doing that or can do that. So like that, those are like choices that everybody makes, but there's not like a right, wrong answer. You know, it's really personal. And then I heard Nina share some edges around cicadas. Oh, Nina, I have that edge so big right now because I'm flying out to Illinois in the end of May to guide an immersion when all these cicadas are coming for the first time in 217 years or something. They're all coming, double brood. And I live in Boston. I don't have cicada, you know, I haven't experienced a brood, never mind 2. I'm totally freaked out. So we can talk a lot about that. I told my co-trainer Nadine that I will try not to shriek the whole time. We'll see what happens. Mostly what I hear is they're loud. So maybe we won't be able to hear anything. And we're gonna see what that's like. But I'm also like, cool, well, I get to have this experience. We're gonna have lots of invitations related to the cicadas, I'm sure. What a way to be with this incredible event that's happening, but to just immerse ourselves in it. And then Nina, I also heard you share about the edge of 3 hours, and yeah, 3 hours seems like a long time until you're a participant on a forest therapy walk, and then it just flies by and it's not long enough. And couple things. I mean, from a marketing perspective, like, you might not get people wanting to commit to 3 hours, and maybe there's language you need to use to support that. I like to call my 3-hour programs like half-day retreats, things like that, mini retreats. Also, you can do 2 hours and see how that goes. You can try different things and see if people are more inclined to do one or the other. And but I wouldn't do less than 2 hours for your practice walks for this course, because that's just the minimum, really, amount of time needed to have a real full standard sequence experience. Rashe, I appreciated what you were saying about rereading material, going back, just taking your time, letting it absorb. I have reread these manuals like many, many, many times. Part of it's because I have to facilitate content on it, but also it changes and it lands differently with me. And Pat talked about you said something like opening the door to yourself, and just this transition of this, like, knowing these things or considering these ways. For some of us, this idea of the way of the guide, letting people kind of be in their own experience and not kind of projecting our experience. I was actually out in the forest this morning with Nadine, who's another trainer, and she was like, step on these pine cones. We were just walking. Step on these pine cones. Don't they remind you of like when you're like don't they remind you of like almonds and like make you think of a salad? And it was just so funny because that was her experience. And then we had this conversation of like, okay, so this is how it starts. And she caught an invitation. She was crunching on dried pine cones, and all of a sudden she could taste crunchy almonds on a salad. And she's like wanting to share this experience with me. Don't you want to have this experience? And I'm just kind of like amused about her experience. And then I start thinking about forest therapy invitations, and it's like, it starts with that association, but then we don't project our association on other people. So what's the invitation that we would give? It's like, wander out on these crunchy pine cones and notice the sensation of walking on the pine cones. That's it. And then maybe it's when we come back, it's like, what are you noticing? And someone's might be like, well, they made me think about crunchy almonds on my salad. I don't know. How did I get there just now? I don't know. Just, I guess back to Pat's comment about just opening the door to ourselves. It's like, for some of us, this idea of forming invitations that are really open and non-prescriptive. We're not trying to get someone to have the experience we had, but we're trying to share some sensory way in and then let people have their own experience. And some of us come from worlds where we know what that means, and we do that. And I've definitely like came to this from a world where this was not a new concept to me, this kind of like let people do their own thing. Some of us, it's like, what? I don't have to hold up the sky. I don't have to make something happen. And it can be like really big. And this 6-month path that we're just 1 month into, it is big and it's really different for all of us. And I just appreciate people talking about what's happening for them, and how this is unfolding. So just appreciating that. Angel brought up accommodations and like mobility stuff. What if you have someone show up and they're like, I really can't hear, I'm hearing impaired, or however they talk about that. One thing is just like checking in with them, what will support you. because sometimes it's one ear is stronger than the other, and maybe they're gonna stand next to you with the ear that they can hear more with, or maybe they need to see you, and maybe you're gonna bring your group in a little tighter, and maybe you're gonna have a little like, if anybody can't hear, we're gonna do this, and we're gonna project. We're gonna try to support people in hearing. And this is kind of cool. So, we have these two different angles of Angel's comment and then Julia's comment, from Amos's video, kind of like rejecting trigger warnings. It's like, how do we hold this balance between like quote unquote safe space, which is like outdated language. If you're in those worlds, you may have noticed what was once called a safe space was then called a brave space, and then called a liberated space, and then maybe all that's been thrown out the window. But the point is, in this context, is and everybody's different on this, I'm different. I actually feel differently maybe than some of the content in the course because of the worlds I come from and the spaces that I exist in. I really appreciate when people take the extra step to be inclusive. And that means different things for different people. And I understand that we all have a spectrum with that. And given that, we all have a place where it feels like too much or it feels overboard. But like what might feel overboard for you might feel like just enough for me to feel like I belong here and I can be here and show up as my full self because of the extra steps you took, the language you used to be more inclusive. So, and for someone else, they're going to be like, much more bare bones limited, and that's going to work for them. So it just, that's really a personal choice. So like things like maybe pronouns, some guides are going to ask everyone to introduce themselves that way. Like they might share their pronouns, and some people are going to be like, heck no, I'm not going to do that. And everybody comes from a really different place about that. So I think, there's a spectrum, and it depends on who you are and what world you exist in. Who are the people coming to your walks? What cultures are you in? And in terms of just back to Angel's thing about like mobility and stuff, in my experience, if you have somebody who's like in a wheelchair, they usually are going to tell you or check in. Like I've had a few like situations. I had this woman whose son was in a wheelchair, and she was like, is it possible to roll my son's wheelchair? It's pretty off-road, like, can I do that? And fortunately it was like totally doable. It was awesome. And also if I know someone's coming in a wheelchair or with someone in a wheelchair, if I can, I'll adapt the walk so that we're not going off on trails that aren't accessible that way. Yeah, it's funny. It's like, as I'm saying that, like, to me, that is such an act of radical hospitality, making the walk accommodating everybody. But again, we have different ideas of what accommodations feel reasonable or too much. Everyone's got a different idea about that. Like disability justice it's massive. And there's a lot of different ways to kind of hold that and think about that. So typically, and then I would also say, usually people will let me know if they're like, I have some limited physical mobility, like, is there going to be a lot, how far are we going to go? Will there be hills? And if I know that that's going to be a barrier, again, how can I adapt this walk so it's not stressful? It's not supposed to be stressful. It's supposed to be relaxing. It's supposed to be restorative. So that's that piece. And we can continue to come back to that. And then also, you were asking about is there a standard amount of time for the invitations? Minimum 15 minutes, including, you know, what's in motion. My pleasures of presence sometimes is like a half an hour. That's not a standard, that's just me. But that might be you too, depending on, you know, the vibe, what feels right, you know. Definitely, like if you send people off, say you're sitting by a little stream and you offer an invitation to go sit by the stream and, you know, be with the water in some way. And you look out and it's been 15 minutes and people are just so like chilled out and in the zone. Maybe you just let it roll another 5 minutes, maybe another 10 minutes. Now, granted, we say, I'm going to call you back in about, maybe say about 15 to 20 minutes to give yourself that buffer time. If they're really in it, they're not looking at their watch. They're not necessary, you know, as long as you said the walk's going to end at noon and you end at noon, you can do invitations for as long as you want. So I would say there's a minimum standard, but you can do a 45-minute sit spot if that feels like the right thing, you know. If anything, err on the side of longer invitations and less invitations than trying to like herd people like back and forth, you know, and cram a bunch of invitations in there. Because again, we want this to be restful. We want to give people space and time to be in their experience. Christy, congratulations on being invited to guide a forest therapy walk on this wellness. I love the way you put this question of like, is this, you know, too risky to guide in a place I don't know? Like, what did you say? It's like something about kind of like living on the edge or something like that.
How high stakes is it?
High stakes. How high stakes? Yeah, how high stakes is it? I mean, it's, you know, it's what you're comfortable with, and like want to acknowledge like you'll still be in the training. It's still new. And what a great way to learn. And I've definitely like I'm going to be doing that a couple times, like on immersions in places I've never been. I've never been to this venue in Illinois where all the cicadas are going to be flying out of the ground. I'm just going to show up, I'm going to look around, and I'm going to guide a walk. So solidarity, you know, we can compare stories and be like, whoa, that was over my head. And often if I get invited to a school out in the suburbs and they want me to guide a walk or something, you know, I go early, I scout it, I try to imagine it, and then I just do it. And that's absolutely, you know, worth trying when you get opportunities like that. Gretchen, you asked about waivers and also just schedule wise when the walks kind of need to be done in order to debrief them in time. And I just want to look at I'm going to actually pull up the schedule for this question. And I'm going to make it bigger because it's so tiny. Can you all see the schedule okay? So if you start to scroll down these pod calls that we're having, here we are on Tuesday, March 19th, and then we have one more pod call in April. And then you all are going to be practicing guiding. And then our pod calls turn into debrief calls. And those are when you're going to come and tell us stories about your walks. So ideally, and you're going to do this twice, you're going to debrief twice. You're going to come and listen to people's stories, and you're going to come and debrief twice. So maybe you guide your first walk before May 14th, so that when you come to that call, you can debrief your first walk. And then you guide your second or third or fourth, maybe you guide all your walks in May, and you're going to debrief another walk on one of those days. So of these calls, I mean, we want you to come to all of them, but you can choose, and I recommend aiming to debrief earlier in case things don't work out. and then you need those later dates. But the absolute drop deadline is this July 23rd will be our final debrief call. In fact, I'm going to even write final debrief call, and that will be the last chance to debrief walk. So you will want to have your walks definitely done by then. And since you need to do 2 debriefs and we can't accommodate our whole cohort to all debrief 2 walks on the very last day, want to encourage you all to spread them out and start guiding earlier. And on that note, the reason that we have the participants guiding each other in April is so that you can kind of just start trying it and to support you and getting ready, you know, because Kathleen mentioned, you know, the edge of just like facilitating POP, never mind a whole walk. So it's our hope that by doing the practice walks in April where you work together and you only do one piece, that will, you know, support you to like take the next step. But I want to back to Gretchen. I'm going to stop sharing. You mentioned, you asked about waivers. And for the practice walks, you know, you're not charging money. It's more casual. It's up to you. Waivers don't really mean anything without liability insurance behind them. There is some links in the course to liability insurance for folks in the US. Alternative balance has been the most popular economical choice. I carry that insurance, and there's links to there, and they're great in terms of you can call them and ask them all kinds of questions about waivers, and they can answer those questions. But for the practice walks, hopefully it's just, you know, more casual. Or alternatively, if you're doing it through another organization, they have their own insurance and their own waivers or that sort of thing. And did I miss any of your questions, Gretchen?
No, I don't think so. That's really helpful on all the procedural. The other question was just about like any supportive like materials for prompting yourself as a new guide with kind of remembering all of the kind of script you have for yourself.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, again, like we were talking about note cards last time, and also just I have a 1-sheeter that I print out for different trails that have different information, different histories. So whatever you need, you know, just give yourself whatever you need to bring with you. And speaking of that, you know, Jane, you know, you mentioned like that you have, you know, a lot of history, and you're like, well, how much should I be writing or telling, sharing, and the difference between guiding pleasures of presence and saying it versus writing it down. I mean, you're writing it, the reason you're invited to write it down is for you to have a little script, just like what Gretchen's talking about here. And it's also a chance for us to gauge your language. You know, is it open? Is it sensory? Is it not prescriptive or too specific or directive in any way? Is it giving spaciousness and room for people to be in their own experience and have their own time with these invitations? So that's really, you know, what that is just a chance to like kind of check in, like, am I getting this? And it's awkward to write down the things that we might say on the fly in the forest. So just want to name that. And in terms of the history, I want to say to everybody, you know, this is really about what's interesting to you. It's not just about giving, you know, a history lesson on colonization. It's like, that's a piece, you know, and what other pieces, you know. I really appreciate all kinds of stories, especially if you're on maybe land that's been in your family for many generations, or you know something about other people between the pre-people and now, and the first people and now, and maybe there's some other stories in there, stories around, there's so much story. I mean, I mean, it's just sort of like the possibilities are endless, and I really appreciate the stories that are interesting to you, you know, around these histories. So, I appreciate reading about some colonization. I mean, sometimes when we get into all the little nitty-gritty battles, I'm like, is that, you know, like, what do I want to say about this? I mean, I want to say like this assignment is sort of designed as a little jumping off point with the ideas that hopefully you will learn more. And it sounds like you already know a lot. So approaching it from that angle, it's like, well, what are the pieces that are interesting to you and why? And what are ways that you feel like some of this history will help tie people into this land in some kind of way that feels connecting or interesting or moving? And I want to say like this can be challenging sometimes for me in terms of guiding how much to say and how much not to say around the history. And there's certain lands that I feel very solemn on because of the histories, because of really hard histories, that I'm like, yeah, this land feels heavy, you know, and how much of that to acknowledge without like going on and on about it, and still being able to hold some spaciousness for people to create their own stories now today as well, but also having that like respect and acknowledgement for what's happened on some of these lands. So, and I'm talking about colonization, I'm talking about slavery, I'm talking about other kinds of like human oppressions that have happened in places and cities, and also just land stuff that's happened around like climate and moving lands and moving waters and pollution and all kinds of stuff like that. And also like other stories that are just kind of unique and fun even. So yeah, I want to say that. And for the assignment, it doesn't need to be a big long research paper. It could be a one pager, you know, pull out the stories you want to tell and share on your walks. And also in terms of you know, you mentioned like the use of the word healing and you know, I don't really talk about how much healing do I talk. You know, you don't have like this doesn't have to be healing at all, you know. And I want to say like take everything with a grain of salt. Like really take what you like and leave the rest in the manual, in the language, to interpret this language and reinterpret it in ways that work for you. Like I mentioned, you know, even like the more than human world, that doesn't work for everyone. You can call it what you need to call it, you know, use language that works, whether it's other than human world or beyond human world or, you know, more than human. Some people have never heard that. And it's like, oh, it does something to our brains around our awareness of how we see things through this like human and then everything else. And that's the idea. But then at a certain point, maybe we get deeper and more philosophical about it. And we're like, actually, what is with this word more? And we get tripped up by that. And I want to say, don't get tripped up. Just find a word that works for you, or don't use words. And I want to say that about the healing piece too. Like, it's hard to not acknowledge the impacts of living in industrialization as humans in 2024. There's an impact. You can call it good or bad, whatever you want. We can be stressed and sad. We can be like, whatever, but it's there. And that's why forest therapy exists. Because we are literally, we've moved from the outside to the inside, and we stare at screens and we look at our phones 100 times a day. And that has caused a huge spike in stress-related illness. So to not acknowledge like that this is a healing practice feels, you know, you don't have to, but for a lot of people it is. in terms of guiding a walk, I'm not telling people they're going to come heal on my walk. I might say that I've found great healing from spending time resting in nature, because that's true for me. And that's just my story speaking for myself. I've found great healing, sense of belonging, because when I'm in nature and sometimes like having a little break from just being in human world all the time, I feel like more myself. I feel like these parts of myself that I have to put away to like make it in society, I feel like they can all kind of come out in the woods. Like I can, just be an alive animal that cries and is weird, and I don't have to worry about the trees aren't judging me in that way. I can just be me. That's really healing for me. But in terms of, how we talk about the practice, let that be something that unfolds for you. The language that you use language that feels good to you, because you're reading the manual that was written by Ben, and it was informed by a lot of people. Ben has lots of conversations with everyone. That's a voice. You're watching videos by Amos. That's a voice. You're hearing me. I'm one voice. And really this practice, ANFT, is informed by like 15 plus people throughout the world from different cultures over time. And this is an evolving language. So there has even been changes. There's been terminology that we used that we don't use. One example of that, right now we call them partnership invitations, which is a little confusing because sometimes people are like, so you need a partner? And it's like, no, we're partnering with the land. We need language in there acknowledging who we're partnering with. Before we called them partnership invitations, we used to call them it depends invitations. And we called the middle part, the liminality part of the walk, the it depends parts of the walk. And that was a little weird too, because people would be like, well, how do you know what invitations do? Well, it depends. Is the wind blowing? Like, what's happening? So that's just an example of like it's impossible to have a perfect universal language with this. It's just impossible. And even within the language of English, which is a pretty limited language compared to some other languages, words are going to hit different, And so like, hearing you, Julia, say like, oh, that video resonated so much for me about like, oh, enough with the trigger warnings. For someone else, they're like, whoa, that feels really hard. Are you calling me a delicate flower because I want to feel included and this slight change in language is going to make or break that? So language matters is really the point. And like your language matters. So finding language that works for you and works for the communities that you're guiding. And just another example of that is like, I had someone in a training who had a really strong faith community, and she would pretty much just guide folks from her church, and they would say the Lord's Prayer at the end of the walk. And that's fine because they all were down with that and they all do that together. But if she was going to guide a group of strangers and lead them in the Lord's Prayer, that would be really alienating to some people. And so it's like knowing the difference, like who is your audience? Is this a group where you, like for me, I've been a mentor and a adult advisor to LGBTQ youth for over a decade. When I'm with them, there's going to be some content warnings about things that may seem like no big deal. But if I want them to feel like they can be themselves with me, there's different things I'm going to do and there's different words I'm going to say. And then, there's other ends of the spectrum and folks I'm going to guide who I would never do that with. So, I also mentioned before about pronouns, like that's not a given. Like I will share my pronouns, but I don't ask people to do that. I invite people to introduce themselves however feels good to them. And what I like to say is, I feel really seen when people use they, them. And that feels really vulnerable because people really like to make fun of that and roll their eyes at it. So, and I don't really care about pronouns, but I care about young people. And so I'm sort of an ally to the youth, to the kids. So that feels important to me, even though somebody else might be like, really? Like, so it's really like about guiding how you guide, truly guiding how you guide, and being with your peeps and knowing how to speak a language that's gonna work for your community. Kathleen talked about being in the space to do nothing, or just how that landed. That was really moving. This is a really radical practice to invite people to do nothing in this grind culture where your purpose really is like all rooted in your productivity, and we're inviting people to put their phones away and just lay down in the forest. That is so radical and so edgy. It's edgy for me. I got bills to pay. I feel like I got to be doing stuff all the time. But what a gift. It's so big. Even if it's just for a few minutes, people doing that who aren't used to doing that, it's huge. And I really appreciate you bringing up the edge around facilitation. Some of us come in here and we're like, I'm a yoga teacher, I'm a Reiki master, I'm a tarot reader, I'm a crystal healer, whatever you do. You facilitate stuff all the time. And this is just like another feather in your cap. Check the box, I'm getting this certification. For some of us, like, we've never facilitated a group thing, and this is a big deal to guide a walk. And especially, like you mentioned, pleasures of presence as an example, like, that it's an edge to even do that. I want to just say, I never ever say, and now I'm guiding you through the pleasures of presence. That kind of, like, in a way, just feels too edgy. Not so much for me, but for my community public walks, that word is a little edgy. So I just don't say it. I just invite people to relax and do what feels good, and that feels a little more accessible language for the groups I'm guiding. And I think it's really important to just find your own language, as I've been saying. So I'm going to stop myself because I've been talking for a while. I saw a hand go up. Julia, was that you?
Yes. Thank you for responding. I think maybe I didn't express it. The words and like the preface for if participants, I mean, maybe I'm just future tripping. Do participants frequently talk about like traumas or drug use or those kind of things where I cannot, predict what they might verbalize? And if that would be, that it's that kind of, I was concerned, like, I can't guarantee that the participants won't say something that could have a lot of impact.
100%. Yeah, we can't. And as guides, like, we don't really police people on our walks. We're not trying to like monitor and make sure everybody's cool with things. I mean, sometimes somebody says something that's like, wow, that was so like gross, and it's really subtle and it's really nuanced. And maybe other people in the group are just desensitized and used to hearing some like weird, subtle, sexist comment like that all the time. But I'm like, ooh, but I'm not going to say anything. The only time I'm going to intervene is if someone's like being violent, like verbally violent. And that just is so unlikely to happen on a forest therapy walk, But yeah, in terms of people sharing about, heavy things, I mean, yeah, it's heavy sometimes, and that's part of it. And I 100% like agree that our job as a guide is to not like eliminate those possibilities of heaviness or hard subjects from coming up, you know, so thank you for clarifying that. Any other comments or questions as a result of all of this so far?
You did the schedule. Do we have class on April 16th after the review? Okay, so there's 2 weeks in a row we don't have class. Thank you.
Yes, that is correct. That's funny how that worked out. You know, I realized because for me it's going to be like dark out, so I moved my walk earlier, or for the practice walk, I'm going to be with groups 1 and 2. And then, yeah, we won't meet that night. Any other questions, logistical, philosophical concerns, clarifications?
Hi, so the insurance piece, you recommend that more when we are certified and or charging for the service?
Yeah, I mean, and it's up to you if you're like more comfortable just getting insured now. I mean, sometimes people are like, I want to get wilderness first aid certified first before I guide. They're not comfortable guiding without that. So it's really up to you. I mean, I didn't get insurance right away and I guided a ton, you know. I maybe didn't get insurance for like a year, but that's me. Living high stakes. Christy
Life
said,
on the edge.
living on the edge. Depends how paranoid you are living in this very litigious country,
Yeah.
the United States, for those of us in the United States. But yeah, it's funny,
Thank you.
sometimes people come on my walks through this arboretum where I guide, and they are from other countries, and I'm having them sign this waiver. They're like, I thought this was just a restful walk where we were going to sit down. I'm like, it is. Welcome to America. So, Julia.
I see Pal joined us. I don't know if he had any questions.
Hi, Pal. Welcome. We were just kind of inviting in any questions. How is the content landing so far? And then I was just mirroring back from our circle and want to weave you in. Thanks, Julia.
A lot of questions and no questions. Thank you.
A lot of questions and no questions. Sounds about right. Any questions that are like you're holding that you want to bring into the circle? Or no pressure, or just listening?
Not at all right now.
Okay.
Thank you, Tam.
Of course. Anyone else have any questions coming up? Any other questions, concerns?
It's not a question, but I'm super excited because I booked my immersion today.
Yeah, you did. You're coming to Vermont.
Yeah.
Me too. I'll see you there.
Yay!
I'm going to Tennessee. I'll see you, Tam.
Awesome. So excited. Yeah, so once you finish module 4 and you get all the assignments through module 4 done, you can apply for an immersion. And this cohort is in a pretty unique position where like you know, you're right on the cusp of being able to do your immersion, like right after your training, if you want to, but you don't have to. You have 2 years from when this training ends at the end of July. So you have till 2026. So there's no pressure to do it this year, but you can if you want to, and they are filling up. Some of them are full. So if that is something you want to do, you should definitely like look into it to make sure you get into the one you want to get into. Kathleen.
Thank you. This kind of a question for the group. It goes back to my hesitation. Just where all have you gone? And we're starting, some of you sounds like have started to actually schedule your practice walks, not just ours with each other, but with like, where are you going to invite individuals? Is it people you know, people you don't know? Just like even, I'm just trying to explore this space of like, never mind getting them on the calendar, but who am I even comfortable asking to come do this thing that I feel completely ignorant about this at this point?
I can speak to that. I have just informed some people that I will, like, for example, I'm in an embodiment class on Wednesday nights that's more focused on breath work. And I mentioned to some people that I was taking this course, and they're like, oh my goodness, when you start offering these, can you please include me? I would love to come. I have friends that are interested. My neighbors are interested. So I just have to be vulnerable enough and willing to make mistakes along the way and hope that they'll forgive me.
I'm sort of similar. I have people from my women's cardiac group who are interested in doing one as a group together. And I actually asked at my medical center, and like all the doctors and nurses and assistants are all so on board to go on a nature walk.
Yeah, I'm doing my first one. I'm gonna do like literally like with my family who lives in the house. That way, if I blunder everything, like who cares? But I'm gonna take them out. We have a state park right down that we love and we've been going for years. So I'm gonna go there for them. I've told several of my coworkers, I work in behavioral health, and they're all excited. And one of my supervisor, she has like 20 acres of land and it has a river and all of that beautiful thing. And she was like, we should do it as a staff retreat. You could do it for the team out here. So I'm really excited about that. And then I have two different groups of friends. One of them are my well, we call ourselves the wine or die chicks, and sometimes we call ourselves the game night girls, but we get together every other month and just have game night and have a blast. So we're going to get to do one with them. So I'm just finding just folks that I love and care about who I want to share with.
Rashay, I love Georgia, so I would fly down and do a walk with you, like super easy.
Oh my gosh, y'all are all invited. It is so beautiful. It's so green, like just it's gorgeous in Northeast Georgia. And yeah, come on down. Seriously, we'll do it, y'all.
It's so great. I got engaged in Georgia. Georgia has my heart. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
There was another really good suggestion made about partnering or going to botanical parks in the area or other types of parks in the area, and just seeing if you could share that information that way. Either they have a bulletin board or their staff is willing to share as people, and usually you can get signups that way. If you're more comfortable with practicing on strangers, which I think, you know, some people might feel one way and some people might feel the other. So that was a good suggestion, I think, for those of us who are like, oh, we might be more comfortable with, you know, practicing on folks we'll never see again.
I'm struggling in Florida if I'm going to do things locally. We are just at the cusp of just like annihilation by insects. So, I mean, I can't even be in my, like, I'm a little concerned. I can't, it's hard to get in my sit spot because of the no-see-em. So I'm really struggling with, gosh, who would ever be somewhere outside for 3 hours and then just heat? Like, there are some core people who will get up really early, or I could do things at the water's edge. And then we have like hurricane season towards the fall, which will be after this course. But so I'm trying to see if I could make like visits up north to my family and do something with a small group there. So if any of you, I would love to attend some of yours. So put it out there. It's tough in summer here. It's to get anyone to leave their air conditioning, which is exactly what we need to do more of.
Julia, one thing, and this may be helpful, I don't know, like you might find somebody in Florida on the forest therapy group page that we were able to join now that we've passed a certain amount of modules. I actually was on there. I love that Facebook page. Someone talked about ticks, and in Georgia, we have a crazy obscene amount of ticks. Like I think we're all going to die from Lyme disease probably. But like someone had talked about that, and they talked about like this specific tick that is really big right now in our area, but that DEET doesn't work, but this other type of spray does work and how important that is. And so anyway, maybe there may be someone in Florida who's given some good ideas on how they're doing it. So I've been learning a lot and just seeing a lot of great ideas from that Facebook page.
That's a good idea. And I do want to, there's several guides in the directory in Florida, so I'll touch base with them. And I actually registered for my wilderness first aid. It's like the last session because it's just going to get too hot to do it here in mid-May. And that facility looks like a potential a place I could guide as well. So that's good. And I'm going to try, I do some with the Florida Trail. It's a big trail. They're like serious hikers. They walk way too fast for me, but I'm doing a weekend with them. And I'm going to see if some of them would be willing to do a very, very different type of and guide with them. A few select few who could settle down. And Tam, I just want to say the cicadas that were just a few years ago that I experienced a brood in Western Pennsylvania when I lived there. And a few years ago, I was in DC. The sound is amazing. I find it enchanting. It's like a cacophony, like spring peepers are up north, quite louder, but it can become very hypnotic. And I've never had them jump on me. So if that helps at all, the sounds were amazing. They were like hypnotizing.
I'd also like to say too that the birds are thrilled. So you've got a lot of other action going on besides the cicadas. I remember them in DC too. Now, I have a question too about where do we upload the wilderness first aid certificate? I couldn't find it on the list of.
It's in the this is the second round of assignment modules, which is after the guided walk module. I don't know that you can open it yet. I'm not sure. But it's down near the bottom somewhere.
Well, it's not going anywhere. Because it said, the list of assignments, it said module 1. So okay.
I just wanted to chime in too, and just maybe this came up and I missed it, but you can guide each other remotely as well. So if you are struggling to get a group, I want to encourage you to reach out to your fellow honey badgers and just say, hey, I need a couple folks to be my participants. And I'm sure you will have some enthusiastic, volunteers. So that's a possibility as well. And especially if you live near certain folks and you can get together that way, that is always really sweet, really good learning too.
I have another question with that, with the remote, with the walks we do with everybody. And then when we talk about them, when we have those meetings to talk about them, this is all verbal, right? We don't record anything, do we? Okay, I just want to make sure.
No, in fact, those guided practice walks, the co-guided practice walks will not be recorded. They're really just for you to practice. And you'll all each have a turn, like you're a participant for the walk until it's your turn to do your part. So like if you're doing the introduction, after you're done doing the introduction, you're a participant for the rest of the walk. And so it's cool because you get to experience different people's guiding styles. Nina.
Hi, I had a question on the same thing, the co-guided walk. I signed up for the introduction. So when I do the introduction, I do about place I am in, right? Like everybody just does their own part, correct? So the park or the area that I'm in, I'm introducing that part. Is that right?
Yeah.
And I have to do it 2 times on the same day?
No, you're just gonna do it one time. You're just gonna sign up for one slot and you'll be part of one walk.
Mhm. I did
And,
sign up for it. I just don't know which walk I'm signed up for.
it should
I
say
have
the
my
date
name.
at the top of the column. So whichever one you signed up for, the date should be at the top. And then just to answer your other question, yeah, you can definitely like use the trail that you're gonna guide on as an example when you're giving your introduction. Julia, there are 2 different time zones. Are you saying there's like an error
There
on
were
the
2 times. Nina was asking about which time. It might have been just 2 different time zones.
Oh
on that.
yeah, there's the Pacific time and Eastern time listed. Did I answer your question, Nina?
I'm on my phone, Tam, so that's why I'm a little bit like I'm also at the hospital, so I'm like just trying to go between. Yeah, if I have further questions, I'll just email you directly.
Okay.
Yeah, I was a little confused about. I saw 2 time. Yeah, maybe it's 2 time zones, but there's only one time I have to do it, correct?
Okay, just to make sure whatever time zone you're in, that it works with the time zones listed.
Got it. Thank you.
Welcome back, other group.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, fabulous call.
Yeah, we had some good stuff come up.
Good. I dropped a birthday song in the chat. If anyone has a birthday recently, I know Juju had a birthday. I think this is actually a song I learned on my forest therapy guide training almost 10 years ago, and I'm convinced it is a vastly superior birthday song than the one we typically hear. So part of my mission to the world is to spread this around. So next week, we are talking about language of invitation. So in the curriculum thus far, we've kind of been building from hospitality introduction to POP to WIM. This next module is going to dive a little bit deeper into creating and crafting partnership invitations. So you can kind of get a sense of how we're building through the standard sequence in these first 6 modules. And that's where we're headed next week. So yeah, keep up with what you're on, and it's about to get even more fun.
And in the meantime, Ben is guiding you all on a forest therapy walk on Friday afternoon, evening. It's 4 p.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. Eastern time.
Yes.
I don't know what time that is in Thailand or Hong Kong, but I hope it's a reasonable hour for you.
Well, it has to be fairly reasonable because they're here at 4 p.m. on Tuesdays, so it's the same time as this call.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah. So yeah, for some of you, it'll be maybe a little bit of an evening walk. Some of you a morning walk. Whatever it is, I'll be very happy to see you there.
So see you on Ben's walk or see you next week for language of invitation. Thank you all so much for bringing your questions, comments, edges, reflections. And if there's any other burning things, feel free to hang out. Otherwise, we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.
Or shoot us an email.